Hey guys, it's vf.miniatures Warhammer Tactics series, and today we're gonna talk about the detachments. I know a lot of newer players have trouble understanding what the detachments are exactly, why we need them, why we need that extra layer of complexity to our already complex gaming system, and for some of you more experienced folks, I have some advice to make better rosters for that competitive style of gaming. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And first of all, let's figure out what they are. Basically, they are building blocks for your battle-forged army, and battle-forged basically means that all units in the army belong to a certain detachment. There are no unbound units in your force. And mainly, you don't even need to have some unbound units because most of your good rules in the codex only apply to your army if it's battle-forged. So in 99% of cases in tournaments or in casual games, you'll encounter battle-forged armies. So you can just forget about that non-battle-forged half. For all eternity, you probably won't even need to know that such armies can exist. So basically, detachments are a mold that you fill out with the units that you want to have in your army, and this alloy makes what your army is. And it also keeps everything organized and performs some sort of a balancing function. It prevents armies from being too gamey and one-sided. There is a whole host of rules that are in place, the detachments being one of them, to make the armies look like armies, because no one wants to play against something that is only 10 planes flying on the table and nothing else, because that's not how Warhammer should probably look like. It should look more balanced because usually it's more fun to play this way. And honestly, if you're trying to build a balanced army, and that's what I always recommend to do, because balanced armies, in my opinion, give you more consistent results, and if you make a good balanced list, you'll probably perform better in a long run than a non-balanced force. So most of these regulations are good for you because you need some HQs in your army, you need something to hold on to those objectives, you need some meat in your force, you need some heavy support that can try to eliminate heavier threats of your opponent and stuff like that. So it basically helps you to make something that is usable on the tabletop. Of course, once you get more experienced and start building some more specialized lists, the detachment rule can become a sort of a stumbling block for you, but you will most definitely overcome it with some experience and effort. You can only have 3 detachments in your Strike Force game, so up to 2000 points, and for your Incursion games it's 2 detachments, and for your Combat Patrols it's only 1, but you probably don't need more than 1 detachment for playing 500 points. As you must know if you have played Warhammer for some time already, each unit has a battlefield role. So for example, a Rhino is a dedicated transport, a Primaris Captain is an HQ, an Intercessor is a troop unit, and etc. and so on and so forth. And in addition to that, each detachment has a minimum units required criteria. So you must have enough of the certain battlefield role, for example, 2 HQs and 3 troops for a battalion, to have a legal detachment of that type. But that's not it. Also, in addition to that, each detachment has a maximum amount of units for each battlefield role. So, for example, you cannot have more than 6 troop units in your battalion. And if you need more troops in your battalion, you must pay for an extra detachment. And you notice how I said pay, because each detachment has a command point cost associated with it. So in order to have access to a certain detachment, you must pay the CP cost for it. However, the patrol, battalion and brigade refund this cost if your warlord is a part of them. So in terms of command points, the most efficient way to play the game and to make a roster is only having a single detachment, either a battalion, a brigade or a patrol. And one last thing about the detachments and their costs is that for some armies, and this you will find in your army codex, some codexes have special rules for the detachments that make those detachments free if you have met certain criteria. For example, the Drukhari with their patrols or the Dark Angels with their Outrider or Vanguard detachments. Also, as a general rule, all of the units in your detachment must be from the same faction, so they must have a single uniform faction keyword. You can find that keyword in your datasheet in the keywords section. Also, it was recently ruled that you cannot mix subfaction keywords in your army as well. So your chapters, your cults, your fleets in Tyranids, and etc. You cannot have multiples of those. You can only have a single type in each of your armies. So you cannot use, for example, Leviathan and Kraken in a Tyranids list in one list. You must have either that or this. Now let's quickly run through the detachment types that we have access to. The first page are our main ones, the ones that refund the command points if our warlord is a part of them. First of all is the easiest one to get, is a patrol. It only requires a single HQ and a single troops unit to start with. However, it has some drawbacks, of course. It only allows you to have 2 HQs, 2 elites, 2 fast attack, and 2 heavy support units, and of course 2 flyers in it. So you cannot make a full 2000 points army with a single patrol in most cases, unless you're playing some very elite force. But for the smaller types of games like Incursion Combat Patrol, the patrol can be very useful, and in some other special cases in the Strike Force games as well, as we'll see in the next section of this video. The Battalion Detachment is my favorite one and the most versatile. It requires 2 HQs and 3 troop units to start with. However, it has a substantial advantage compared to the patrol. It allows you to have 6 elites, 3 fast attacks, and 3 heavy support units, and also 2 flyers as the patrol does. Also, it allows you to have 1 more HQ, so 3 HQs in total. Next is a very unpopular one, a brigade detachment, the one that I think should be slightly adjusted in the next edition of the game, because I think that brigade is too hard to get for what it's worth. It only gives you access to 2 more elite slots and 2 more heavy support and fast attacks. However, it requires you to have 3 HQs to start with and 6 troop units, and also 3 elites, 3 fast attacks, and 3 heavy supports, which is extremely hard to get for most of the armies. Even some armies that are famous for the hordes that they produce, like Tyranids, for example. It's relatively difficult for Tyranids to have 6 troops, 3 HQs, 3 elites, 3 fast attacks, and 3 heavy supports. You need to adjust something in your list to get to that point. You probably don't need as much, for example, fast attack if you have so many troops and etc. But for armies like Imperial Guard, maybe the brigade is the way to go. Next are our paid detachments, how I like to call them. It's the 3 types that have all the same pattern to them. They only require you to have 1 HQ, and they allow you to have 6 of a certain type, either the fast attack, heavy support, or elites, and they require you to have at least 3 of those. They are very useful and have only one substantial disadvantage. They require you to pay 3 command points, and they don't refund it if your warlord is a part of this detachment. In terms of other types of battlefield role allowances, you have access to 3 troops in each of those, 2 fast attacks, 2 heavy supports, and 2 flyers, and up to 2 HQs as well. So very much like a patrol detachment, but with much more fast attacks, elites, or heavy supports. And the next section of the detachments are the very much specialized ones. So like the Supreme Command Detachment, which is only for your Primarchs, Demon Primarchs, or Supreme Commanders, like Shadow Sun, for example. You will only use those in very special occasions, and these detachments, they help you refund the command points for the either the patrol, the battalion, or the brigade that you may have in your army, even though the Supreme Command Detachment requires you to have a warlord in it. So this just like overrides the basic rule for the patrol, battalion, or brigade. Next is basically an Imperial or Chaos Knight detachment, which can feature up to 5 Lords of War, and that's what you may use to make a Knight army, and it's not really useful for any other force, because you will be forced to pay either the 3 command points, or in most cases 6, to have the 3 Lords of War. You don't need that in armies other than Knights. And if you want to have a single Lord of War in your force, the Super Heavy Auxiliary Detachment is for you. You will have to pay 3 command points for that, or 2 command points if your army is not Chaos Imperium, Aldari, Inari, or Tyranids. So, for example, your Tau or your Necron Lords of War. In some cases, it may be very useful if you want to run a single monolith, obelisk, a very questionable life choice, but anyways, and you need to fit it somehow. As you can see, the battalion, for example, doesn't have a Lord of War in it, even a single one, so you will have to bear with the super heavy auxiliary and its cost. The fortification network is only useful if you are using fortifications, which you are not, so let's move on to the auxiliary support detachment, which costs 2 command points, and it's a way to add any single unit of almost any battlefield role, apart from the Lord of War, of course, into your army. The only problem is that you need to pay those 2 command points, and as with the super heavy auxiliary, the fortification network, and this detachment, you don't get the detachment abilities that are associated with your faction, faction specific. So if you want to have those chapter tactics, for example, you need to have the battalion, patrol, the vanguard, etc. You cannot only have a single super heavy auxiliary. This detachment will not get the chapter tactic, unfortunately. For example, the Astreas in the Space Marine army won't get the chapter tactic of the Iron Hands, for example. So I recommend to fit everything into the first 2 pages of the detachment, because in those cases you will get all the rules that your army provides. So, the detachments play a very significant role in how our army will ultimately perform on the tabletop. They affect our starting CP count, which is obviously very important, and how many units of the same battlefield role we'll have available. Sometimes we need to spam some unit type, and it may be difficult to achieve without running enough command points by spending them on those paid vanguards, outriders, and spearheads. And here are some tips I have for you, and probably the most important one is start with the units, not the detachment. The detachment must always bend around your idea, not vice versa. I see a lot of newer players making the same mistake over and over again. They choose a detachment, which is wise, you need a detachment to start with, but they don't think about the idea of the army, something that they want to get at the end of the line. And what they do is they start filling out the slots, the required ones, and then they start to fill out the extra ones, and at some point the points cost start to add up and they start running out of points, and now they have the problem created by their own hands, because what they wanted to actually have in their army isn't there, because they have not thought the idea of the force through, which is something that you should always try to do. Second tip, start with the battalion. It's the most versatile detachment, and only after you've tried using the battalion, try going other ways, because the battalion is so versatile, so useful, and it has only a single drawback, which is 3 units of troops tax that you must pay. That it's usually beneficial to start with it when you're trying to build a list, especially a competitive one where you need most of your command points on the board. It's especially relevant when your troops are useful, great, and you need them regardless. In this case, battalion is almost impossible to beat. Only if your troops are pretty bad and you don't really need them for your game plan, and you need troops, for example, to hold on to objectives, you need the troops because of their OPSEC rule and so on and so forth. These are the things that we discuss in some other videos. But if you don't really need the troops, that's where you should start trying to incorporate either the patrols, where you need less troops to start with, or the vanguards or spearheads, which are the paid ones. In some rare cases, you might even want to pay for the battalion, refund the command points with your wallet, and then pay for the vanguard or spearhead to have more elites or the heavy support slots if you really need a lot of those. I don't really know why you would need 12 elite slots, but some Space Marine players must disagree with me. Also, a double patrol is a nice combo, because it's like a semi-paid modified battalion. You need to pay 2 command points, which is less than 3 with Vanguard or Spearhead, but you get 4 HQ slots instead of 3, you get 4 heavy support slots instead of 3, 4 fast attack slots instead of 3, but you only need two troops units to start with, and you don't pay a lot of command points like in the case of Vanguard. And you may very much need those heavy support slots for some Craft World lists or tyrannies with those Carnifexes, Tyrannifexes, Exocrines that ultimately don't fit into a single battalion, and you may not want to spend the 3 command points for the Spearhead. And for some very niche rosters, you might only need a single paid detachment, like the Vanguard for Space Marines, for example. I've used one in the Black Templars How to Play video. You might check it out if you want to see an example. Or the Spearhead for Tyranids with all those Carnifexes, Tyrannifexes, Exocrines, and other heavy support units that you very much want to have in your army, Screamer Killers, and so on and so forth. I recommend not to use more than one paid detachment because, in my opinion, in most cases, like 99% of cases, it's not worth it. You can make a roster with the 3 detachments or a single paid detachment or a combination of both and have enough units of your choice with some command points left for the game. Starting the game with 3 command points is not fun at all and not really competitive in my opinion. So that was my quickish look at the detachments in 40k. I hope this video was useful for you. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.